Buried to the chest in cold swamp mud, shaking, starved, and left to die, he was once a hero. A retired K-9 named Valor, discarded like an old tool when he could no longer serve. For 6 hours he didn't move. No rescue, no hope, just silence and sinking. Until an old man with a camera and a quiet past heard the cry no one else could. A man who'd lost everything, except his instinct to save. What happened next will break your heart and then put it back together again. Before we begin, where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments. And if you love soul-stirring stories about brave, loyal dogs, hit that subscribe button so you never miss another miracle. Now, sit back and take a deep breath. This is the story of how one forgotten warrior found home again. Spring crept slowly into Cypress Ridge, Louisiana, bringing with it low-hanging fog and the heavy scent of damp earth. The swamp stirred under a silver sky, its still waters barely disturbed by the movement of unseen creatures. Spanish moss hung like ghostly curtains from the limbs of ancient cypress trees, and the air buzzed softly with the chorus of waking insects. It was the kind of quiet that felt sacred, unchanged, untouched, indifferent. Half submerged in a remote pocket of the marsh, a German shepherd lay motionless. His name was Valor. He was old 13, maybe 14. His black and tan fur was matted with grime, clumped with dried mud, and stretched tightly over a frame thinned by age and neglect. His hind legs were sunken deep into the thick swamp muck, useless now, trembling slightly with the last shreds of strength. Around his neck, a faded tactical collar bore the scratched lettering, K-9, Unit 47 Tex. Name, Valor. The brass tag clinked softly against the plastic as he shifted his head barely. Once he had been a hero, a working dog, a partner to men and women in uniform, trained to protect, detect, track, defend. He had faced fire, chaos, gunshots. He had pulled children from wreckage, followed criminals into the dark, but those years were long past. He had outlived his usefulness, and like so many old soldiers he had been cast aside. He had wandered, confused, hungry, following the smell of fish and stagnant water until his weakened legs gave way in a patch of soft mud. The deeper he struggled, the faster the swamp tried to swallow him. That had been hours ago. Now, Valor didn't move. His breathing was shallow, erratic. His ears twitched with each buzz of a nearby insect, but his eyes, those loyal, intelligent eyes, had dulled to a glassy stare. Above him, birds circled lazily in the rising heat. A dragonfly hovered near his snout before darting away. A heron, standing on a nearby stump, eyed him for a moment, then turned away. Even the swamp, wild and harsh as it was, seemed to accept his fate. Miles to the west, on the outer edge of Willow Bend, a quiet town with one diner, a shuttered gas station, and not much else. Elliot McGraw was tying his boots. 70 years old, tall and slightly stooped, Elliot carried himself with the precision of someone who had once answered alarms in the middle of storms. He had worked 32 years as a Coast Guard rescue diver, pulling strangers from floodwaters and wrecked boats. Now he lived alone in a weathered cedar cabin on the edge of the swamp, surrounded by bird feeders and solitude. His face was lean and sun-darkened, with a white beard trimmed to the edge of his jaw. His pale blue eyes, faded but sharp, reflected a quiet weariness, the kind that comes not from years, but from outliving the people who mattered. Since the death of his wife, Margaret, Elliot had found solace in the simple rhythm of the swamp, rising early, rowing out with his old Nikon camera, photographing egrets or cormorants perched in the trees. It gave him purpose. It gave him silence. That morning, just past 6 a.m., Elliot filled a thermos with black coffee, slung his camera strap over one shoulder, and stepped into his boat. The air was cool against his skin. He pushed off with the oar and let the boat glide for a moment before dipping into a steady rhythm. The water was glassy and still. Cattails swayed gently on either side of the narrow channel as the boat drifted deeper into the reeds. Elliot was scanning the trees, looking for the telltale silhouette of an osprey nest, when something unfamiliar pricked at the edge of his hearing. It was faint, barely audible over the creak of wood and the soft splash of water. A sound that didn't belong to birds, wind, or insects. He paused, lifted his oars, and listened. A low, broken sound. Guttural. A whimper. It came again, longer this time, almost like a cry choked by mud. Elliot sat up straighter, brow furrowing beneath the brim of his hat. He had heard sounds like that before, not in the swamp, but in his rescue days. Sounds people made when they were too far gone to scream. He adjusted his course, steering the boat toward the dense patch of reeds from where the sound had come. That morning, he heard a desperate whimper echoing from deep within the swamp. Elliot pushed the oar gently against the mud-choked bank, his boat scraping to a slow stop among the cattails. The sun had climbed higher now, thinning the early morning fog into soft wisps that clung to the tree trunks like old lace. Cypress knees rose out of the water like ancient bones, and dragonflies skimmed the surface, oblivious to what lay deeper in the marsh. But Elliot had eyes only for one thing now, the shape, barely visible ahead, sunken deep in a nest of swamp muck. At first it had seemed like driftwood, dark, still, and out of place, but as he drew closer, the shape took form. The body of a dog, large, half-submerged, caked in mud and barely moving. Only its eyes revealed life. Amber, dimmed with pain, but still watching, still waiting. Elliot's chest tightened. "Oh, God," he breathed. The dog wasn't just stuck. It was dying. He stood slowly, his legs stiff with age and cold. The boat wobbled beneath his weight, but he steadied himself and reached for the old coil of rope under the seat. His fingers moved automatically, years of rescue training returning like instinct. He tied the knot, checked it, then stepped one foot onto the squelching bank. The ground gave beneath him, sucking at his boot like a living thing. He gritted his teeth and pressed forward, using his free hand to pull reeds aside. Each step forward was slower than the last, the swamp refusing him passage. The air was thick with the stench of wet rot and stagnant water. But Elliot didn't care. His eyes were locked on the dog. The German shepherd's fur, where it wasn't buried in mud, was matted and dull. His ears drooped low. He didn't flinch when Elliot approached, didn't growl, didn't even try to move. His body was motionless, but his gaze was steady. That gaze struck Elliot harder than any noise could have. There was something in it, resignation. Yes, but deeper still, the faintest trace of hope, as if the dog couldn't believe someone had actually come. Elliot crouched slowly. His knees cracked and his hands trembled, but he managed to reach out and touch the collar. It was stiff with dried mud, but he could just make out the engraving. K9, Unit 47 Tex. Valor. He swallowed hard. "You were somebody's partner," he murmured. "You did your part." He looked around. No sign of anyone else. No path, no trail, no clue as to how this dog had ended up in the middle of nowhere. "All right, old boy," Elliot said softly. "I'm here now." He uncoiled the rope and gently looped it under the dog's chest, trying not to startle him. But Valor didn't resist. He simply closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them again, still watching, still holding on. Elliot planted his feet in the mud, braced his back, and pulled. Nothing. The dog's body didn't budge. The swamp had claimed him too deep. Elliot tried again, harder this time, but the rope dug into the dog's side without lifting him an inch. Sweat beaded at his temples despite the cool air. His boots sank further with each movement. "Come on," he muttered more to himself than to the dog. "Just a little give, that's all I need." But there was no give, only resistance, and time slipping by. Elliot dropped to one knee beside the dog, panting, mud creeping up his shins. His arms ached. He knew if he kept pulling without a plan, he could hurt the dog or himself. And they were far from help. He sat there, one hand on Valor's neck, feeling the faint pulse beneath the skin. "We're gonna figure this out," he whispered. "You hear me? Just hold on." He stayed like that for several minutes, catching his breath, forming a plan. The boat was too far to reach with the rope from here. The mud too thick to pull Valor out in one go. He would need a makeshift pulley system, or at least a longer board to shift weight. But for now, he could only stay. Keep the dog company. Let him know he wasn't alone. And somehow, in that stillness, the dog seemed to understand. His breathing slowed slightly. His eyes closed for a few seconds, then opened again, and this time they no longer looked desperate. Just tired. Just grateful. 20 minutes away, in the modest brick building of Grayson County Sheriff's Office, Officer Lauren Keene flipped through a file folder with growing unease. Her uniform was pressed, her badge gleamed, but her expression was shadowed with frustration. Lauren, 28, stood 5'7", with an athletic build and sharp features softened only by her deep, hazel eyes. She'd transferred from Baton Rouge to Grayson 6 months ago, burned out after a city case involving illegal dogfights that ended with one officer shot and several animals dead. She had sworn never to work with animal cases again. But here she was. 4 dogs, all found within a 5-mile radius of Cypress Ridge. All underweight, all ex-working breeds, 2 shepherds, 1 Belgian Malinois, 1 bloodhound. All abandoned. Lauren stared at the evidence photo of a collar. Worn nylon, government issue, marked K9. She tapped her pen against the desk. Someone wasn't just abandoning pets. They were dumping trained animals. And no one in the department seemed to care. She stood and walked to the shared office printer where her partner, Deputy Ray Tomlin, was waiting for his coffee to finish brewing. Ray was in his mid-50s, stocky with a permanent frown and a gut shaped by years of desk work. He had a deep southern drawl and a slow-moving patience that made him well-liked by townsfolk, if not always the fastest investigator. "You think it's just old dogs getting dumped?" Lauren asked, waving the photo. Ray shrugged. "Happens." "Not like this," she said. "Too close together. Too trained. Someone's disposing of animals." He raised an eyebrow. "What are you thinking?" "Liberty Tactical K9, she said. "Private training group. Blacklisted 3 years ago. Resurfaced under a different name last fall in Monroe County. It fits." Ray nodded slowly. "You planning to poke that hornet's nest?" Lauren exhaled. "Not yet. I'm driving out toward the ridge this afternoon. Just want to see if any new signs show up." Ray grunted. "Watch your step. That swamp will swallow you if it wants to." Lauren gave a tight smile. "I don't scare easy." Back in the swamp, Elliot wiped a sleeve across his forehead. His body was cold, but his mind clear. He knelt again beside Valor, checked the rope, and made sure it wasn't cutting into him. The dog's breath rattled softly but steady. His eyes were still open, still focused. "You held the line for years, didn't you?" Elliot said softly. "Now let someone hold it for you." He placed a hand on the dog's side and sat quietly. Just the 2 of them. Alone in the quiet green of the swamp, but no longer forgotten. Not today. The morning sun had begun to warm the mist, thinning it into ribbons of gold that curled between the cypress trees. Birds had returned to their chorus, and the swamp, indifferent as ever, resumed its quiet rhythm. But for Elliot McGraw, standing knee-deep in the mud beside a nearly lifeless German shepherd, time had slowed to a crawl. Sweat beaded on his brow despite the chill that still clung to the shaded parts of the bayou. He wiped his face with a muddy sleeve and looked down at the dog beside him. Valor hadn't moved much since Elliot first found him. His breathing remained shallow but steady. His body was cold, heavy with mud, and so limp that Elliot had started to wonder if he was fading away right there in his arms. But then Valor shifted slightly, his paw twitching, and his eyes flicked upward. There was no panic, no fear, just a weary recognition, and that was enough. Elliot took a deep breath. "All right, old boy," he muttered. "This ain't gonna be pretty, but we're getting out of here." Using the rope still looped under Valor's chest, Elliot braced his feet against the thick roots of a nearby cypress and pulled. The first effort failed. The rope slid slightly and mud sucked back around the dog's belly. Elliot grunted, reset, and pulled again, this time leaning with all his weight. Valor's body lurched forward a few inches freed from the muck. Again. Another grunt. Another pull. Inch by inch, the dog's frame began to slide through the cold sludge. It took nearly an hour, his back screaming in protest, his arms trembling, but finally, with a last, desperate heave, Elliot dragged the full weight of Valor into the boat. The old wooden vessel dipped precariously, water sloshing at its edges. Elliot dropped to his knees beside the dog, chest heaving. "Jesus," he whispered, brushing hair from his damp forehead. "You weigh more than my whole damn toolbox." Valor lay still, breathing hoarse and uneven. Elliot pulled off his flannel shirt, folded it, and slid it under the dog's head. He removed a wool blanket from the emergency crate at the stern and draped it gently over Valor's shivering form. Then, settling himself at the oars, Elliot began to row. It was a slow journey. The boat moved sluggishly through narrow channels choked with lily pads and algae, but Elliot didn't care. Every few strokes he turned to glance at the dog. Still breathing. Still here. By the time the cabin came into view through the moss-draped trees, the sun was high, and the marsh air had grown thick and warm. Elliot's cabin stood modestly at the edge of a grassy bank, a small wooden structure with a tin roof, faded green shutters, and a porch that leaned slightly to one side. A wind chime tinkled lazily in the breeze, and a rocking chair sat empty by the door. He tied off the boat and fetched an old wooden plank from the dock, propping one end against the gunwale. Then, slowly, carefully, he slid Valor's body onto the board and let gravity guide them down onto the grass. The dog groaned as he settled, and Elliot knelt beside him once more. "Home," he said softly. "You made it." Inside the cabin, Elliot filled a bucket with warm water and returned with a soft towel and a bottle of unscented dish soap. He worked patiently, wiping away layers of mud, revealing patches of black and tan fur beneath. Valor barely moved, save for the occasional twitch of a paw or flick of an ear. When Elliot rinsed his muzzle, he saw the dog's eyes flicker open dull, but no longer empty. "You've seen hell, haven't you?" Elliot murmured. "Well, so have I. But we're not there anymore." Once clean, Valor was wrapped in another blanket and laid gently near the fireplace where a slow flame crackled. Elliot added another log, then sat down beside the dog, running a hand slowly over the bony ridge of his back. He stayed there for a long time, just listening to the fire, the soft breath of the dog beside him and the wind rustling through the trees outside. In Grayson, Officer Lauren Keene sat hunched at her desk, the glow of the computer screen reflecting off her tired eyes. The precinct was quiet now. Most of the day shift had cleared out, and her partner, Deputy Ray Tomlin, was off tending to a routine trespassing call. But Lauren wasn't resting. She was staring at a new discovery, a microchip scan from one of the abandoned dogs brought in earlier that week. The ID number was clean. No criminal markers, no false registry. But what caught her attention was the line beneath it. Unit 47, K-9 Division, Texas State Patrol. Retired, 2021. Handler, Sergeant Marcus Hill. Lauren leaned back in her chair. Her mind raced. Valor. That was the name etched on the collar. She remembered it now, briefed once in a seminar, part of a case study on high-performing K-9 units. A dog that had served in multiple joint operations, even been injured in the line of duty. Then, gone. Filed as missing post-retirement. She grabbed her notepad and jotted a line in heavy pen. Find Sergeant Hill. Trace Valor's transfer. Why was he dumped here? The pieces were starting to shift. Back in the cabin, Elliot placed a shallow bowl of water near Valor's head and a small portion of soft food beside it. The dog didn't eat yet, but his nose twitched at the smell. Elliot sighed and reached for a battered book from the shelf, one of Margaret's old favorites. He opened to the marked page and began to read aloud. His voice was rough, aged but gentle. As he read, Valor's eyes slowly blinked closed. Not from weakness this time, but from calm. He was safe, at least for now. And for Elliot McGraw, who hadn't shared his cabin with another soul in over 5 years, something quiet and profound shifted inside his chest. The storm had passed by dawn, leaving the cabin soaked and quiet. Rainwater slid off the tin roof in rhythmic drips, pooling in puddles along the porch steps. A faint mist clung to the tree trunks, and the air smelled of pine, ash, and something else, something cleaner, like the soft renewal that follows a long night of fear. Inside, the fire had reduced to embers, but the room remained warm. Valor lay curled near the hearth, his breathing steady, the blanket pulled up to his shoulder. Elliot sat beside him with a steaming mug of black coffee and the TV on low volume, something he hadn't bothered with in years. It was an old model, half glitching, always a bit too loud on certain channels, but that morning it played the morning news from Baton Rouge, cycling through weather warnings, traffic, and crime reports. Elliot wasn't watching the screen. He was watching Valor. The dog's ears twitched. Subtle at first, almost imperceptible. Then again. When the weather segment transitioned into a city siren blaring from a background video, Valor's whole body jerked. He scrambled to his feet, shaky but instinctive, eyes wide, his tail lowered, legs tense, breath sharp. He moved to the far side of the room and backed into the corner, facing the TV, frozen. Elliot stood up slowly, mug forgotten on the table. "It's okay," he said softly, stepping between Valor and the screen. He muted the TV and knelt down. "Just noise, boy. You're not there." But Valor wasn't looking at him. He was locked onto something else, something far behind Elliot's shoulder, in memory more than space. His mouth was open, breath panting, and a soft whine rose from his throat, primal and low. Elliot crouched with one hand outstretched. "Valor," he said again. "You're safe here." The name broke the trance. Valor blinked, then looked toward Elliot as if seeing him for the first time again. Slowly, he lowered his head, ears still twitching, but the panic drained from his eyes. He limped forward and pressed his side gently against Elliot's leg. "That's it," Elliot whispered, rubbing his back. "That's it." Later, when the sun broke through the mist and cast warm light through the kitchen window, Elliot stood at the counter slicing leftover ham, occasionally glancing toward the dog who now dozed with his chin resting on crossed paws. He had questions now, real ones. That wasn't a random reaction. That was muscle memory, training, trauma. That was a dog who had seen things no animal should have to remember. He sat down and opened the old laptop Margaret had used to keep her garden blog, still functioning after all these years. He typed in the serial number from Valor's collar. Nothing. Then he tried the unit number K9, Unit 47 Tex. It gave him a city, Abilene, Texas. Elliot jotted it down in his notebook. In Grayson, Officer Lauren Keene leaned over her desk, phone tucked between her shoulder and cheek, eyes scanning a spreadsheet as she spoke. Her voice was calm but sharp efficient, the way she had trained herself to sound since transferring from Baton Rouge. "Yes, I'm looking for any records connected to Unit 47 out of Abilene. K9 program, specifically between 2016 and 2021, she said. A pause. "Yes, I understand some files are sealed. I'm not asking for disciplinary reports. I just want handler information and post-retirement transfers." The man on the other end, a bored-sounding clerk from the Abilene Public Safety Department, sighed. "You got a name?" Lauren glanced down at the photo of the dog in her file. Valor, German Shepherd, black and tan, retired 2021 after injury. There was silence for a moment. Then, "Yeah, I remember hearing about him. Hang on." A few clicks echoed through the line. Lauren tapped her pen against the desk, staring at the wall of incident photos above her desk maps, paw print comparisons, collar tags, names. The voice returned. "Got it. Valor, assigned to Sergeant Marcus Hill, retired post-injury. Hero dog, pulled 2 kids out of a house fire before collapsing. Internal notes said he was never the same after that panic episodes. Light sensitivity, loud noise response. They transferred him to a rehab kennel down in Monroe." Lauren scribbled the name. Hope Creek Recovery Kennel. "And then?" she asked. There was a pause. "Says he was adopted out in mid-2022. No further tracking." Lauren leaned back in her chair. "Who adopted him?" The man's tone grew cautious. "That part's redacted. Says the adopter was a contractor with private military credentials. That's about all I can give you." Lauren narrowed her eyes. "Let me guess. Derek Rolfe?" There was another pause, then a reluctant, "Yeah." She hung up and sat still for a moment, staring at the file in front of her. A hero dog discarded like old gear. Panic episodes. Flashbacks. Redacted transfers. She opened a new search and typed, "Hope Creek Recovery, Monroe County, complaints." The results came fast. One in particular. Local rehab facility accused of neglecting retired service dogs. She clicked it. The name Derek Rolfe appeared again. Back at the cabin, Elliot stepped outside with a phone in hand. He hadn't used it for anything but grocery reminders in years. But he dialed anyway. The number on the city registry for the Abilene K-9 division. The phone rang twice before a woman picked up. "K-9 Unit, Sergeant Daniels speaking." "Hi," Elliot said, clearing his throat. "You don't know me. Name's Elliot McGraw. I found a dog, in pretty rough shape. I believe his tag reads Valor, Unit 47. There was a pause. Then the voice came back, softer. "We thought he was dead." "He's not," Elliot said, "but he's been through hell." The air was thick with the scent of rain and pine sap. Clouds, heavy and dark, curled over the treetops, rumbling with distant thunder that rolled like drums across the low Louisiana sky. Elliot McGraw stood on the porch of his cabin, a weathered flannel draped over his shoulders. He watched the forest sway and sighed, knowing a storm was coming again. Inside, Valor slept beside the fireplace, his body curled tight, breath steady for now. But Elliot had seen the signs: shallow breaths, occasional tremors in the paws, and ears that twitched at every sound. Something was building. As the first crack of thunder broke overhead, Valor's body stiffened. His head jerked up, ears erect. The low rumble that followed was enough to send him scrambling to his feet, legs wobbly but moving. He backed toward the wall, eyes wide and wild, teeth slightly bared, not with aggression but pure, unfiltered fear. Elliot stepped back into the room slowly, voice low. "It's okay, boy. Just thunder." But Valor wasn't hearing him. He was locked into something unseen, some memory. His legs crouched into a defensive position. His breath came in shallow, rapid bursts, and a low whine rose from deep in his throat. Elliot moved slowly toward the corner where the old guitar rested against the bookshelf. It hadn't been played in years, not since Margaret passed. The instrument was dusty, the strings probably needed replacing, but he picked it up gently and sat down on the old wooden stool by the hearth. His fingers found the chords by memory, stiff and hesitant at first. Then he began to strum. Soft, slow, the melody of Wayfaring Stranger, a song Margaret used to hum while watering her plants. The sound was gentle, almost hesitant, like the swamp holding its breath. The storm outside rolled again, but this time something in the rhythm seemed to catch Valor's attention. His breathing slowed slightly. His head tilted. His ears twitched, but no longer in panic. He took one hesitant step forward, then another, until he was lying beside the hearth again, chest heaving, but calmer. Elliot didn't look at him. He just played, note after note, repeating the melody. He didn't know if Valor recognized the tune or just felt the comfort in the old wood and trembling strings. But it didn't matter. The dog had stopped shaking. That was enough. When the final note faded and the room fell back into quiet, Elliot looked over at him. "You remember things," he said, "things you never chose to carry." 3 hours north in a quiet rural township near Shreveport, Officer Lauren Keene parked her cruiser in front of a small log home nestled between two dense oaks. The windows were shuttered and the yard overgrown, but the porch was swept clean, and a fresh pile of chopped wood leaned neatly by the door. She checked the paper in her hand. Marcus Hill. Former Sergeant. K9, Unit 47 Tax. Lauren climbed the steps, brushing damp curls from her face as she knocked on the door. There was no answer at first. She knocked again. Eventually, the door creaked open a few inches. A man stood there, late 40s, broad-shouldered, sun-worn face, beard untrimmed, eyes tired but alert. He wore a plain gray t-shirt and jeans faded from use. A long, pale scar ran from beneath his right eye down to his cheekbone, a reminder of something that had once gone terribly wrong. "Marcus Hill?" Lauren asked. The man nodded cautiously. "I'm Officer Keene, Grayson County. I'm not here to arrest or report. I'm looking for a dog." He didn't move. "That so?" "His name is Valor, German Shepherd, retired from your unit after the house fire in 21. You were his handler." Marcus's jaw clenched and his eyes flickered with something between surprise and pain. "He's dead." Lauren stepped forward. "No, he's not." She handed him a photo-grainy but clear of Valor lying on a blanket beside a fireplace. Marcus took it, stared at it long and hard. His hands trembled. "That's him," he whispered. "They told me he died in transit to the rehab facility." "I think he was dumped," Lauren said quietly, "and he survived barely. A man found him out by Cypress Ridge, pulled him from a swamp." Marcus sat down heavily on a porch chair. His breath caught in his throat. "He saved 2 kids in that fire. Went back in twice. We both came out burned. But something broke in him after that. Loud noises, sirens, even the smell of smoke. He never came all the way back. They said he couldn't be placed, that he'd be taken care of." Lauren nodded. "But he wasn't." He looked up, eyes sharp now. "Where is he?" "Safe," Lauren replied. "With the man who found him. Older gentleman. Lives in a cabin by the ridge. Valor's recovering. But I need your help. I need you to come with me, to confirm it's really him, and maybe help him start healing." Marcus looked back at the photo. He traced the line of Valor's spine with his thumb, softly, like touching the memory of a friend long thought buried. After a long pause, he stood and went inside. When he returned, he wore a jacket and held a leash, worn leather, frayed at the handle. "Let's go," he said. At the cabin, the storm had passed and twilight was settling. Elliot sat on the porch with Valor lying at his feet. The dog had eaten a full bowl and walked to the door on his own. The shaking had stopped. The fire crackled inside, casting soft amber glows across the wooden walls. Elliot scratched behind the dog's ears. "You got ghosts in there," he said, "but you're not facing them alone." The wind was gentler now, rustling the treetops like a lullaby. Valor's eyes were half closed. The porch light hummed softly, and for the first time in a long while, Elliot felt like the night didn't press in on him. It welcomed him, held him, just as he held this dog who had come back from the edge. The morning after the storm broke quiet and still. Mist clung low across the clearing, and the scent of wet pine and firewood drifted softly through the air. Elliot McGraw stood at the edge of his porch, hands tucked into the pockets of his jacket, watching the trees sway gently in the wind. Behind him, Valor lay near the door, awake but motionless, his head resting on crossed front paws, his eyes following every movement with quiet alertness. Elliot hadn't slept much. The memory of Valor's panic during the thunderstorm still echoed in his thoughts. He'd seen that kind of fear before, on ships, in burning houses, in men returning from places they never talked about. But to see it in a dog, one who had served, bled, and been forgotten, that hit different. He turned when he heard the soft rumble of tires on gravel. A white SUV crept down the narrow path toward the cabin, branches brushing against its sides. Elliot stepped off the porch cautiously, squinting at the windshield as the vehicle rolled to a stop. The driver's door opened and out stepped Officer Lauren Keene. She wore a forest green field jacket over her uniform and a neutral expression that barely masked the fatigue behind her eyes. Her auburn hair was braided tightly down her back, and her stance was firm, confident, but not aggressive. From the passenger side, a man emerged, broad-shouldered, gray t-shirt, jeans, boots that had seen years of wear. His beard was rough and a faint scar curved beneath his right eye. Elliot knew right away this was someone with a past, someone who carried it like a second skin. "Mr. McGraw," Lauren said. He nodded. "You're with Grayson County." "Yes," she replied, stepping forward. "This is Sergeant Marcus Hill, retired." Marcus said nothing. His eyes were on the porch, on the dog. Elliot followed his gaze. Valor had lifted his head now, ears pricking forward. He didn't move, but his body was alert, tense, watching. "Is it really him?" Elliot asked quietly. Marcus took a slow step forward, then another. He didn't call out, didn't kneel. He just walked until he was close enough to see the dog's eyes. They stood that way, man and dog, for several long seconds, several long. Then Valor pushed himself to his feet, limbs trembling but determined, and took one uncertain step forward. Marcus knelt, reaching into his jacket and pulling out a worn leather leash. The moment he held it out, Valor stopped. Something flickered behind his eyes. Recognition. Pain. Then something broke loose inside him. He moved quickly now, stumbling, bumping into Marcus's chest and pressing his head hard against the man's shoulder. Marcus wrapped his arms around him. "Hey, partner," he said, voice cracking. "Hey, it's okay. I've got you." Elliot stepped back, giving them space. Lauren stood beside him, arms crossed tightly, blinkings more than usual. "I didn't think he'd remember," Marcus said, not looking up. "But he does." "He never forgot," Elliot murmured. Valor licked Marcus's chin once, then collapsed into a sitting position, his head still leaning against the man's chest. His tail wagged just once. Inside the cabin, the fire had been stoked again. Lauren helped Elliot move a chair to make space as Marcus carried Valor inside, cradling him like something precious. The dog was heavier than he remembered, not in weight but in the years and pain he carried. He placed him on the blanket near the hearth and sat cross-legged beside him. "He was the best," Marcus said after a long silence. "Trained in narcotics, search and rescue, crowd control. But more than that, he was intuitive. He could read people. Saved 2 kids in that fire because he heard something no one else did. Dragged one of them out himself." "What happened to him?" Elliot asked. Marcus exhaled deeply. "The fire shook him. The smoke, the noise, he got caught in the back hallway before I pulled him out. After that, he started shutting down. Wouldn't eat, flinched at every sound. They sent him to Hope Creek, promised they'd care for him until he was placed with a therapy unit or companion family. I followed up for a while, but then they stopped answering my emails. They said he went missing. I thought he died out there alone." "He almost did," Elliot said, "but he didn't." Lauren stepped closer, pulling out her notepad. "We have reason to believe Hope Creek's new management Derek Rolfe and his team have been discarding unprofitable K-9s in the wild. Valor's not the only one. We found 3 others. Dead. He's the only one who made it out. Marcus's jaw tightened. I want names. I want locations. And you'll get them, Lauren said. But for now, he needs you. Valor rested his head on Marcus's knee, his breathing slow, eyes half closed. Elliot watched them quietly, then disappeared into the kitchen, returning with 2 mugs of coffee. The cabin grew warm with conversation. Marcus spoke in fragments old missions, training routines, jokes from patrol days. Every now and then, Valor's ears would twitch, responding to the sound of his voice like an old soldier hearing the cadence of a familiar march. Lauren stepped outside to make a call to the precinct, giving the 2 veterans space to reconnect. As she walked the muddy trail behind the cabin, she felt something shift inside her, something small but powerful. Closure, perhaps, or maybe hope. Inside, Elliot sat beside Marcus and stared at the fireplace. You gonna take him with you? Marcus ran his hand along Valor's neck. If he'll come. But I think he's got a new home here, too. He's welcome, Elliot said. Always. As the sun began its slow descent behind the trees, casting long shadows across the floorboards, Valor stirred again and nudged Marcus's boot with his nose. Still got a little fight in him, Marcus smiled. And a whole lot of soul, Elliot added. They all fell quiet, letting the crackle of fire and the whisper of wind fill the space where words were no longer needed. Spring bloomed fully in Cypress Ridge, wrapping the swamp in bursts of color and the hum of new life. The air had grown warmer, the sky clearer, and the trees along the marsh road shimmered with fresh green. At Elliot McGraw's cabin, the air buzzed not just with insects and bird calls, but with quiet hope. For the first time in a long time, the house no longer felt like a place of waiting. It felt lived in, whole. Valor lay in the sun just beyond the porch, his coat now clean, his ribs no longer visible through thinning fur. His ears perked up at every new sound wind. Birds, the creak of a squirrel darting along the railing, and his tail thumped steadily against the floorboards. He had gained back strength over the past 2 weeks, walking more, even attempting short jogs when coaxed by Elliot or Marcus. His limp remained, a reminder of what he'd endured, but there was purpose in his movements now. Presence. Inside, Marcus Hill stood at the stove cooking eggs while Lauren Keene leaned against the kitchen counter, scrolling through a report on her phone. She wore a dark green flannel and jeans, a break from the uniform, though the badge never quite left her posture. Her face, once tense with unanswered questions, was now focused and sharp with purpose. They raided the Monroe kennel last night, she said, her voice steady but low. Found 8 more dogs, 2 alive, 6 not. Marcus's face tightened. He cracked an egg too hard against the pan, the shell splintering into the mix. Rolf? In custody. He's not talking yet, but we've got enough evidence to bury him. She set the phone down and crossed her arms. He was running more than one site. Contract dogs from defunded programs, private protection breeds that aged out, dumped like broken tools. Elliot entered from the back door carrying a watering can and wiping sweat from his brow. You said they're shutting all of it down? They will, Lauren nodded. I'm pushing for a federal task force. There's too much gray area in how these animals are handled after retirement, and too many people willing to profit from their pain. Elliot glanced outside at Valor. He's proof they're not done just because they've been forgotten. Marcus placed a plate in front of Lauren and sat down beside her. His rough beard had been trimmed slightly, and he moved with a calmer rhythm now. Valor's recovery had softened something in him. His voice was no longer guarded, his eyes not so hollow. Later that day, the 3 of them took Valor for a walk along the edge of the swamp. The ground was dry from several days of sun, and the air was filled with the chirping of frogs and the occasional flap of waterfowl wings. The path led past a small community playground where several families were gathered, kids running barefoot through the grass and laughing under the trees. Elliot paused, squinting toward the waterline. A small boy, no older than 6, had wandered too close to the swamp's edge, chasing a frog. His name was Noah, a neighbor's grandson visiting from Baton Rouge. With tousled blonde hair and wide green eyes, Noah was a curious, fearless type who often slipped away from the picnic blanket to explore. One minute he was crouching by the reeds, the next he had lost his footing and slid into the muddy shallows with a splash. His mother screamed. Chaos erupted, but Valor was already moving. He shot forward like a fired arrow, muscles instinctively aligned with an old command that no one needed to give. He dashed past the tree line, across the clearing, and into the water, his body cutting through the surface like a dark streak of lightning. Noah, now submerged up to his chest, flailed and cried out as the mud pulled at him. Valor reached him in seconds. He clamped his jaws gently around the back of the child's shirt and pulled backward with controlled strength. It wasn't elegant. It was raw and desperate, but it worked. Inch by inch, he dragged the boy up the muddy bank. By the time Elliot, Marcus, and Lauren reached the edge, the child was in his mother's arms, sobbing but safe. Valor stood a few feet away, soaked, trembling, and breathing hard, but his tail wagged faintly. People gathered. Phones came out. One man clapped. Another wiped his eyes. The local newspaper reporter, a short red-haired woman named Jenna Marsh, who happened to be nearby covering a spring festival story, snapped several photos, her voice breaking as she whispered, "He just saved that boy. Did you see that?" Marcus knelt beside Valor, rubbing his soaked neck. "You still got it," he whispered, pride thick in his voice. That night, the photo of Valor dragging Noah from the swamp circled local news, then the state, and finally went viral. Headlines read, "Retired K9, Hero Saves Child from Drowning," and "Forgotten Dog Redeems a Nation's Trust." Comments flooded social media with messages of thanks, tears, and demands for change. Inspired by it all, Lauren made a decision. 3 days later, she stood before a podium outside the Grayson County Courthouse, flanked by Elliot and Marcus, with Valor lying calmly at her feet. "I'm proud to announce the founding of the Valor Center," she said into the mic, "a dedicated facility for the rehabilitation and retirement of former service dogs, where they will receive the love, care, and respect they've earned. No more dogs will be discarded. Not under my watch." Applause followed. And for a brief moment the world didn't feel so cruel. The sun in Cypress Ridge sank slower than usual that evening, its amber light spilling gently across the marshlands, gilding every leaf, every ripple, every sigh of the tall grasses that swayed with the breeze. It was the kind of quiet light that held time still, the kind that painted the final page of a story not with sorrow, but with grace. On the wooden porch of the small cabin, Elliot McGraw sat in his worn rocking chair, his hands resting gently on a mug of lukewarm tea. He wore his old ranger hat tilted back, silver hair brushing his collar. His weathered face, usually drawn and quiet, now bore a peace that softened his deep lines. Beside him, a little lower on the steps, Valor lay curled with his chin resting on his front paws, his ears twitching with every whisper of wind. His coat had grown fuller, the rich tan and black of his German shepherd fur gleaming in the evening light. "Funny," Elliot murmured, looking down at him. "How I thought I was saving you." Valor blinked slowly, then shifted just enough to nudge his muzzle against the old man's boot. Behind them, the door creaked open and Lauren Keene stepped out, balancing 2 glasses of sweet tea. She had changed into a cotton sundress for the first time anyone had seen, pale blue with a sunflower print, and her chestnut hair, usually tied back in a regulation bun, now fell in soft waves past her shoulders. There was a freedom to her that hadn't existed months before, like a weight had lifted. She handed a glass to Marcus Hill, who followed her out with his usual quiet stride. Marcus, now trimmed and shaved, wore a simple white shirt tucked into his jeans. The shadows under his eyes had faded. He moved like someone learning to breathe again. The 4 of them sat together, Two humans who had lost parts of themselves to time and trauma. One young woman who had carried a cause no one else dared pick up, and a dog whose heart had never stopped serving, even when the world had. They said little. They didn't need to. Earlier that day, Lauren had stood before a crowd under a white awning at the edge of a newly renovated facility. The sign above the gates read in large, bold letters, Valor Haven, a sanctuary for K9 heroes. Beneath it stood a bronze statue of a German shepherd mid-run, head high, gaze proud. At the base was a plaque etched with just two words, Still Worthy. The crowd had included officers, veterans, trainers, and families. Some had traveled across state lines. A few held the leashes of older dogs retired, graying, their eyes bright with recognition. Lauren had spoken firmly, her voice trembling only once when she mentioned the swamp, the mud, the second chance that came not with sirens, but with one man's kindness and a dog's refusal to give up. Valor taught us something we forgot, she had said, that even when the world discards you, there is always someone who sees your worth. Sometimes we just need a place where that worth can heal. This is that place. That morning, 2 more dogs had arrived, retired from the force, surrendered after budget cuts. Their tails wagged slowly as they were welcomed into the facility. One had scars down his side. The other was blind in one eye. But both walked with heads held high. As the sun now dipped behind the trees, painting the sky in hues of copper and rose, Elliot reached for a biscuit from the tin beside him and passed it quietly to Valor. The dog took it with gentle teeth, crunched once, and settled again. Marcus leaned forward, elbows on knees. "You really gonna let him sleep in your bed again?" Elliot grinned. "Only 'cause he snores less than I do." They all chuckled, the kind of laughter that comes from deep healing. Lauren leaned back against the wooden post of the porch, her eyes distant. "You know," she said softly, "I never used to believe in second chances. I thought justice had to be loud to matter, but sometimes it's in the quiet things. A rescue in a swamp, a song played on a porch, a statue for a dog." Elliot nodded. "Second chances aren't given," he said. "They're made, by people, and by dogs like him." Valor raised his head briefly at the sound of his name, then dropped it again, as if content with the moment, with the air, with the porch he now called home. As twilight deepened, fireflies began to blink in the grasses, and the night chorus of frogs and crickets rose in song. The cabin lights glowed warm behind them. Inside, a photo now sat above the mantel, a framed image of Elliot and Valor, taken the day of the rescue. Next to it was a folded American flag and a small brass tag engraved with the number TXK9 3227. That number would live on now, not just in records, but in hearts, and in a sanctuary at the edge of Louisiana where no dog would ever be discarded again. We don't get to choose where our stories begin, but sometimes, if we're lucky, we get to choose who walks beside us as the chapters unfold. Valor was just a forgotten dog in the mud, but in finding him, Elliot found himself again. So did Lauren. So did Marcus. A wounded animal became the spark that rekindled memory, healed loneliness, and restored faith in second chances. That's the beauty of life. It often shows up quiet and broken, wrapped in fur and silence, but it carries the power to change everything. Maybe in your life, too, there's a moment waiting to be seen, a soul needing saving, a purpose buried under the noise. Maybe what you're looking for isn't something, but someone. And maybe, just maybe, the smallest acts of compassion can become the greatest miracles. So if this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs hope. Leave us a comment to tell us where you're watching from, or simply type Amen to stand in faith with us. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss another story of love, redemption, and loyal hearts. May God bless you and guide you to the moments that matter, Sometimes they start with a whisper or a bark.